Am I on? Okay, it's on.
We are on. As soon as that goes, we're on now. Hello, my name is Andrew McGregor. I serve as vice president this year of the illustrious century-year-old Los Angeles Adventures Club. For most of the past 100 years, every Thursday night, people have gathered here to discuss and share and create community around theories, ideas, and the practice of adventure. I'm blessed, humbled, and privileged to share the stage tonight with Logan Gelbrich, and we're going to get into more of Logan's amazingness soon, but I just want to introduce you to this proverbial world with, tell us about this world record you have.
Yeah, I have a world record. It's very peculiar to talk about. I have a world record in a very specific strength sport called strongman, and one of the most kind of classic implements in this world is the Atlas stone, and kind of got lucky. I had an opportunity to perform this feat, which is the most weight moved by Atlas stone in a minute, and they had very specific criteria about how you had to do that, and yeah, the rest is kind of history.
And so how heavy was the stone, and how many times did you lift it, culminating in how much weight?
Yeah, so if I remember correctly...
I'll do your humble bragging tonight. You just be...
this is real tough for me, okay, so it's a bit of it is a math problem, right? Based on the task and the standards, I kind of had to do a little bit of math of like the sweet spot, of course, between like the max load that you could also move quickly and carry the one, right, get the highest score. So I think what we ended up with was 225 or 230 pound stone for 13 reps, I think, if I remember correctly. So almost 3,000 pounds.
In under a minute.
Yeah.
It's just like this, like a child with a bouncy ball.
Yeah, different kind of ball.
Yeah, okay.
Childlike, yeah. And so, I don't know. I sort of backdoored into this strength sport that I know that you enjoy as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I have a peculiar skill set around stone loading. You know, I ended up competing in the sport on an amateur level for just a few years and tended to like overachieve in this event. So
tended to overachieve. That's cute.
Yeah.
So something else that's fast. So the sport of strongman, I first discovered on like ESPN 8 with Magnus Magnuson,
Saturday morning,
lifting 4 steel crocodile, and so that was my introduction to it. And then later in life, I got to get involved in the community you forged. But you're kind of known with kind of, I don't know, good cheer as a skinny strong man, because most practitioners of the sport are, like, what do you say, like 350, 6'4" to 6'9",
of course
thing. And so you're the skinny strong man with a world record. How do you track that? Like, what
how do I reconcile that?
What's different? Why are you so special, buddy? Huh?
No, I'm still trying to figure that out. So first of all, there are divisions, okay? So I am a lightweight, and my division
But your world record is divisionless, so...
That's right,
I'm going to humble brag you were on that one as well.
I'm sure there's some people in Iceland that would like a crack at the record. I think they'd have to set it up well and maybe execute it well, but yeah, I mean, I'm a lightweight, 231 pounds and below qualifies as lightweight in this thing. Above lightweight is everyone else, and so it sort of pays to weigh closer to 400 pounds than 250 pounds, right? And so it gets kind of intense thereafter. But the way that Guinness did it is very specific. So you had to load the stone to a platform, 48 inches. While the stone was on the platform, you had to like make contact with your legs below your waist, basically to secure the lift, so to speak. And so, yeah, it would be difficult to break the record on a single platform just because of time and speed. You know, I say that just for context because many of the strongman events I'm not no longer invited to because I'm not that person anymore. I'm not a professional. I'm not 400 pounds. But this particular record for 60 seconds was something that I was able to do well in.
Cool. So you spoke of speed and power.
Yeah.
Let's talk about you're a wee lad in Santa Monica, the gleam in your eye and a skateboard under your feet.
Yeah.
Your aspiration was baseball,
Yeah.
not giant stones of world renown.
Yeah. My whole life from age 6 or 7 was very specifically oriented in an extreme way to one goal. I wanted to play Major League Baseball. And so that's sort of why it would be difficult for me to like celebrate and talk about some of the things that I've done in like the strength world, just because I don't perceive myself as an athlete even or a competitor anymore. And the reason is that I've devoted like 20 years of my life trying to accomplish this goal. And
The baseball goal.
the baseball goal, yeah. So basically, I was born in Santa Monica. I grew up down the road from where I believe Larry grew up in Westchester. We went to elementary schools within like blocks of each other. That was kind of a cool one. I'm not embellishing when I say that at such a young age I had a very singular focus. I remember that being weird amongst my friends, and sort of, I think a lot of kids have big goals or dreams, so to speak, at that age, but I do remember having this, what I thought was an understanding of what it would take to accomplish it. And long story short, it just meant that I was self-motivated to train all day long.
Can you talk, because a lot of people in that position, like their fathers would like, you're going to do this, boy.
Yeah.
But you speak of it as like you were touched by the baseball angels. So like, how much of it was your parents? How much of it was like, was it unexpected that you would say that? Like your father's like, no, you'll be an accountant. And you're like, no, Dad.
No, totally. It's a strong point because there's probably not much that I'm more grateful for than my relationship with my parents. I sort of realize now how much of a sort of fertile soil it is to raise a child that is always perceiving that they are safe and loved. And I'm not doing like a embellishment about my parents when I say that I really believe that I could have told them I wanted to be anything when I grew up, and they would have supported me the same. And so that is juxtaposed my experience against a lot of my former teammates and people that you come across. I know that was rare. And so I mean it when I say 0% of my experience was, you better get out there and hit some balls or whatever, And so it kind of gave me a clean slate, I think, to contribute a best effort at something like that.
So where does a 7-year-old get an iron will from, and what does that look like?
I don't know. I think we all, I don't make an assumption. I feel like it is a normal human experience. Sometimes it fades away. To feel like you're like special in some way. And I always felt that for whatever reason, probably because of my parents, that I could do anything. And I really felt that if I dedicated a best effort, that would never steer me wrong. And so, as I say that, I don't know if that's a normal thing to think. But anyway,
it sounds like faith. Is that an okay characterization? Or?
Yeah, I think so. Here's what I remember. I remember knowing that the thing I wanted was hard enough that any other path than a best effort would not work. So it just sort of, it was an obvious choice at that point, You find a way to demonstrate a best effort, and it removed a lot of like variables in my life. It removed a lot of questions, or I was never like really like searching. It was very obvious to me how to go about that. And luckily, you know, I believe now afterwards that any environment that would extract that type of commitment and self-reflection yields very transferable skills into other things. And so now I can say I feel that the baseball element of that is redundant, but I feel grateful that I had a thing, so to speak, you know, to learn maybe the lessons along the way.
So looking back at it, like baseball was a kind of like vessel of the moral spirit, if you will, into how to do other parts of life, and that's what let you get a world record lifting stones that perhaps one other person Iceland could do, kind of thing.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, so, and I don't mean to like downplay. I realize there's a certain significance around the Guinness Book and those things. But by comparison, it seems to me, this is just my experience, like silly and inconsequential, because I know the difference between the effort I've put into the sport of baseball versus backdooring into strength sports and, you know, subsequently like what I do now for a living, you know. And so I mean, you asked me to bring some of the books. Like I later wrote a book in part, in part trying to articulate what it is that you're asking me, which is with a proper vehicle for development, I think we can extract the skills necessary to do anything. And there's a lot of people in this room and this club that are able to look across the room at another person who has done different things in different industries and different parts of the world, but there is some sort of knowing between them. And that's what I observed in retrospect coming out of my, you know, short baseball career, was that I didn't have the model for it. I had to later come up with the model to write the book, but there was a knowing that I had coming into the real world as an adult, which was sort of that I was going to be okay, that I could win in anything because of how you win in that thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting. I recommend reading the book out there on the interwebs and in the room. I train in chess, and my teacher grew up under the Soviet system, and it was a system. And then with the versus in the Cold War era, it was Bobby Fischer, who was like the individual genius from New York, versus this totalitarian system. I don't like see it in quite those terms in your work, but you are describing creating great individuals from communities and institutions as a type of symbiotic relationship, if that's an accurate description. But within the American athletic ethos, it is like very ego-driven and attention-driven and things like that, which I think can degrade and compromise community. And so, but you've been able to like have both worlds flourish in a way.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak to that, and weightlifting itself with its kind of genesis in Eastern Europe for some of the methodology and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit of an idealist, just to touch on the point of like ego-driven performance. I mean, I would agree with you that that's generally an American sentiment, but ultimately, if rigor of, you know, performance, winning or competitiveness or whatever the arena is, sorts out a lot of the maybe surface level reasons for participating, ego, glamour, etc. I don't, I could be challenged on this, but I don't perceive there's any all-stars of sport, no matter how big their necklace is or what they do on the weekends, that are able to achieve their level of performance on some sort of superficial ego thing. Ultimately, they've integrated the things that I'm sort of talking about: commitment, deep work, you know, these ideas of like resilience to adversity, the mechanics of flow states. Like there are in my opinion, no exceptions to that in that level of performance. And then just to your point about individualism versus the collective, I have a bias, which is team sports, right? So there may be some differences, with my bias and something like chess. But, I was fortunate at the college level, NCAA level, to learn both anecdotal, skin in the game, rich group dynamics. When you get a group of 30 people trying to perform better than any other 30 people in the country, and dovetailing that with some support in academia, and that was my time in the leadership school at the University of San Diego, and working with Dr. Kara Miller, who we've talked about before, is sort of like a crash course in what is possible in the group. And I think that anyone who has been on a powerful, high-performance team knows that, like, unequivocally, there's an X factor in those dynamics.
Can you give a specific example of that, like bar story style, like
like the team, like the team thing?
Yeah.
Well, just for context with my collegiate program, okay, so I arrived at the University of San Diego, and we were, the way I like to describe it is a top 25 NCAA Division I program that is kind of always in the mix to win the conference, and that's about it. And over the course of 4 years, we ended up being, top 5 Division I program in the conversation to win a national championship. Not to glory days it, but so my last year we lost I think a 5-2 baseball game that you could just flip a coin and pick a team to win. Fresno State, who ultimately was the national champion that year, and I really perceived that we were as good as anybody in the country at that time. And there's a certain transformation that happens from one level of performance to the highest level of performance in a team. And, bar story style, the way I would describe it is, we were just good enough and not quite famous enough to really be a problem on the competitive scene without a lot of the issues that come with some of maybe like the assumptions or like a prima donna attitude. And so I remember we walked into Texas A&M. It was probably the single best collegiate baseball experience there is. It's a full stadium, double-decker thing, sold-out crowd, choreography in the crowd based on, they'll count your steps back to the dugout after a strikeout, 6,000 people, left, right, left. It's just they're trolling you the whole time, It's a very intense environment. We went in there and won the tournament and beat those guys up pretty good, and that's what you see in like the newspaper or whatever. But the night before the tournament, there was a moment where I saw, and I was young at the time, younger, wasn't an upperclassman yet. 30 young men came together, those hotel rooms that have a divider door in the middle. We sort of open the divider door and say, everybody's in room 144 at, 8 p.m. or whatever, and called a meeting. And the reason why this is a significant moment was the younger crowd, my class, sort of called this meeting for a sort of like sea change in the culture. And what it was a taking of ownership of the outcome. Because what happens when individuals get together in groups of any size, there is a tendency to have a diffusion of responsibility. Okay, so the easiest thing to do in a group of any kind is to complain and to avoid any sort of responsibility. It creates a downward spiral, toxic type environment. And it's always sort of outsourced. There's always this finger pointing, and usually it is to the leader. So, any mediocre team's favorite thing to do is to blame someone other than themselves for their outcomes. And so what we were able to do that night in that hotel room was say, hey, this season's going to end in June no matter what. What would it be like to move about our days in a way and act in a way that when July comes around, we all can look at each other and say that was our fault, whatever the results were, right? And that would then take the ownership back to us and sort of, it wouldn't guarantee a great performance, but it would sort of maximize our chance of success. And so right there, what you saw was the youngest players on the team setting new norms for the group. And seeing that is something that sort of stayed with me, because it wouldn't be the last time in my life that I would be a part of a small team trying to do something extremely difficult. And anybody who's had a job anywhere or tried to be on a team for anything realizes how quickly things can go bad in terms of a victim mindset or a lack of ownership. So the rest is sort of history. The University of Texas was a previous national champion, #1 in the country preseason, and they came to San Diego, and we swept them at home, and the rest was sort of history. We went from 25th in the nation to 4th in the nation, and sent a bunch of guys to the big leagues and created something really special. And it was a PhD level experience in group dynamics and team culture. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that there isn't a day that I wake up and go to bed and don't recall that experience, to move about entrepreneurship now.
Yeah, let's talk about carrying that spirit of that moment forward. And then, so you do so many things. Do you want to talk about the gym culture and that? Because that's a similar extrapolation, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about your gyms and what they are to the audience, and then
get
into the specificity of how that transformation moment, if you will, or cultural transformation affects your current work?
Of course. So when I left my career, I say that like I had a choice. When I got fired from professional baseball, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and that was more like a value system choice. I really wanted to create something from nothing. I wanted to step into the responsibility, the sort of totalitarian responsibility, like you have to sink or swim on your own, of entrepreneurship. And slowly the idea in which I would express this entrepreneurship became crystallized into what I sort of said early on was like a movement school, a place where regular people would go and be coached and treated like athletes. And ultimately, that brings us to DEUCE, which is a brand of we call them micro gyms, private gyms, where strength and conditioning gyms, where people come and take courses, and they're coached just in the same way that you would if you ran track in college or if you played a professional sport. Classic, simple, tried and true training methods for all people. And when you step into entrepreneurship, and we're talking about a vehicle for development, it could have been baseball, it could have been badminton, it could have been surfing, it could have been anything. But when you attempt to be the best in the world at something, whether you do it or not, there's a certain obvious next question, which is, well, what are the best practices? What's the best way to do this? Okay, so when you start a business of any kind, you got to ask yourself, all right, well, if we're going to survive and make money and do this well, what are the best ways to do that? And so immediately, what that looks like for me is deploying the things that I can't unknow about team culture to make a business survive. And so the gyms that, there's several locations now, had humble beginnings as a park program. So basically, this guy, Danny Leslie, and I would drive our trucks out to the park twice a day, every day, like full of gear. And we would try to convince anyone who would listen that we had this gym. And it was just a patch of grass in the park. And the reason why I bring this up is even as a sort of incubation phase in the park, the vision was not that. It was to create this robust culture. And so I can say that we weren't the first people to train people in the park. That was not a novel idea, but we were probably the only people, maybe ever, that were training coaches while we were training people in the park. And that sort of sparked what I think you're referring to, which is this developmental culture. I sort of perceive the gym business as, just like I perceive baseball, which is just a vehicle for development. And so basically the gym is a front. It's not a real front. It's a real business, but it's a front for development. Basically, we're bringing people in to a process to understand where their edges are interpersonally, where their edges are technically with training, and use our weaknesses as the fuel for our own development. And I'm subject to that, and everybody else on the team is subject to that. And so we're basically trying to create what I end up now, and like my work is a lot of consulting and coaching other people and their entrepreneurial efforts, is an organization that is deliberately developmental, right? Meaning we're trying to build a thing that by its own nature will improve over time. And if that isn't done on purpose, most organizations do the opposite, which is as they grow, they get worse because of increased complexity, like I said, delusion of this responsibility. And so we sort of borrow the rigor of performance that I observe from sport, sort of supported by some of the academic stuff, and it creates this whole architecture of how the gym is run.
Cool, that's fascinating. I was wondering if you could speak to what's the mechanism of improving quality, and then how have you seen that through like a story of or a few stories of people you're particularly proud of, like who've benefited from this kind of subtle cultural standard you've implemented with your team?
Yeah. So people often refer to the gym, and this may be your experience as well, as this place with a unique culture. And I think a lot of times we perceive great culture as this sort of magical thing. It's like this, it was a special time and a special place, and there was this special thing in the air. And if you leave it as this magical thing, then you sort of have to wait around for it to come around. And so the challenge and the thing that I think is interesting for all of us is if creating culture isn't magic and it's something that can be done on purpose, how do you do it? And the way I sort of teach it, and my belief is that culture can be created on purpose. And most remarkable teams from business or sport or the military have either an implicit or an explicit rite of passage, meaning some sort of filter from which people who want to be on the team have to pass through before they get on the team. And it usually involves attrition, meaning lots of people want to be on the team and not a lot of people get on the team. And it's usually, there's some sort of hardship, it takes longer than you'd like, there's different characteristics. all that to say is what this rite of passage does specifically is develops at least two very critical qualities, and this is what I think is required. The best teams in the world have remarkable, uniquely remarkable levels of trust and willingness. And the reason why those two qualities are critically important and how it sort of dovetails into what we do at the gym is the best information available to us for improvement is disconfirming by nature. Okay, so if I tell you all of the confirming information, meaning the things that you already know to be true about yourself, the things that you already believe, if I could somehow download your brain, which this would be a big download, and I read all that information back to you, would you be the same or different? Probably the same, okay? But if you wanted to be different, bigger, more capable than you are sitting here right now, by definition, you would need some sort of frame-breaking, disconfirming information to expand your perspective. Okay, so every room that I go talk in or every team I'm on, if I ask the question, who here wants to be more capable, bigger, further along, more evolved than they are now, all of the hands go up. Okay, so this creates a paradox where human beings generally like to be told nice things, positive things, reinforcing things, and they are all good and important. But if we're talking about the richest information for development, which is our obsession, you have to create a culture where you can exchange that type of information. So, quick example, if we want to take a stereotypical low performance corporate America job, the language in that job between coworkers, for example, could be stereotypically passive aggressive. I have to like compliment you on your outfit and tell you 3 other nice things before I tell you the thing I really want to tell you, which is that you need to have your report on my desk on time next time, and then I got to compliment you before you leave the room, right?
Nice tie, by the way.
Thank you.
I wanted to mention
that
earlier.
I'm not a big sports fan. Sometimes I mention this guy, people get upset, but that's not how Tom Brady talks to his receivers. It's more direct. We care about winning a Super Bowl more than we care about how much you're going to compliment my outfit today, right? And so, long-winded way of saying, in groups that have high levels of trust and willingness, they are in an environment where they feel safe to perform their best vulnerable effort. And inside of the natural failures that happen inside of a best effort, you can use and exchange the feedback necessary for improvement, right? But if we can't talk about that, we can't get better.
That's fast. How do you create and cultivate that and avoid just sadism? I get, because I mean, there's this tradition of like, a lot of like big time American football programs, just straight what's like straight viewed as abuse and cruelty now.
Yeah.
That's like the flip side of this culture. So yeah, how do you have the intrinsic benefit to all involved through that? It's fascinating.
It's a great question. And there's many examples beyond just like you're sort of referring to hazing or whatever. If you have a strong rite of passage that develops the qualities that I'm talking about, but you do not have a continued rigor for development, you create exactly what you're saying, which is basically a good old boys club. And there's lots of organizations like this. I'm not trying to be derogatory, but mostly trying to come up with familiar examples. There's plenty of good fire departments and plenty of good police departments out there. And we can think of those archetype examples of the police officer who isn't fit enough to run anybody down or complete the task, or probably hasn't passed a shooting course in a long time, right? Yet it's a type of organization where you went through boot camp 20 years ago, therefore you get to treat people that are younger than you like crap, right? It's a good old boys club. The best teams in the world don't operate like that. If you can't do the job to a high level, and you're not continually growing, the system does not support that, right? So, classic rite of passage, our highest performing military teams have a selection, whether it's Navy SEALs or, Green Berets, and that rite of passage builds the trust and willingness that I'm talking about. However, the difference between that type of organization and the toxic high school football program that you're talking about has such a rigorous demand of continuing development that everybody is held in tension, right? No one is free of the feedback loop, so to speak. And the beauty in that is, and this is kind of bringing it back to the gym, is I really believe that we all want to work in a place where we can show up as we fully are, right? Meaning that you don't have to hide your weaknesses or hide your failures, but that you will be stretched. And by definition, in a place that you are stretched and growing, which is where we get fulfillment from, there is these sort of failures and hiccups and things like that. And so it creates a self-sealing culture when everybody is on the hook for their best, right? And I think that the pitfalls that you're talking about happen when that rigor is gone after the initial phase.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think this is a nice seg into one of your recent initiatives, which is taking this methodology and integrating people who've recently left incarceration within the context of your gym. So yeah, is that kind of a culmination of this, or can you give us some personal stories of that? Because you're talking about like tension and then leaving one institution and.
Yeah, of course. So basically we started a nonprofit through the gym that seeks to empower people who are system, substance, and housing impacted. A lot of times those layers, people are affected by more than one or all three of those things, of course. And the way that it emerged was sort of naturally. So the way all of these things emerge is sort of with a selfish, kind of self-fulfilling need to be a good business. We throw around this idea that it's a bit of an anti-charity. Because how it was born was out of the same rigor that we're sort of talking about. So long story short, a gentleman reached out to me several years ago named Campbell Lillard, and he had just finished a 10-year sentence and has an incredible life story. At a young age was involved in the street culture, drug culture, and survived and endured a very violent, traumatic prison experience, 10 hard years, and he found training inside of prison because he's a small guy, was trying to keep himself safe, and reached out to me, and I wrote him back, and apparently not many people wrote him back, so I got lucky there. And he wanted to know what it would take to be a coach. And so I gave him a few things to do, and eventually invited him into our coaches development program, which is something that people follow all around the world online. And unbeknownst to me, he decided in his mind that he wanted to move from Dallas to Los Angeles to work at the gym. And so every day he wrote on his bathroom mirror, "What are you doing to get to LA today?" And he found a job through a nonprofit that helps people get sober with workouts in the park. And he said, basically, and I'm learning this later, he said in his mind, this company is expanding, and I need to work every day here at this company such that if an opportunity ever comes up to go to LA, if they open something in LA, that no one else could be chosen except me. And he did that, and I think you've had experiences with Campbell. It's not surprising. He is one of the most incredible people I've ever met in my life. And then he felt himself fearful that he would back out of this goal of his. He saved up all his money and went to a seminar I teach called the Hold the Standard Summit in Scottsdale. sat in the front row. His girlfriend almost left him and said, "What are you doing? You just spent all of our money to go to a business seminar? You're a criminal. What are you doing?" And he sat in the front row. I've never been so nervous to have someone sit in the front row of one of my seminars because I knew what it took for him to get there. And he left that seminar, and he also forgot to tell me this part as well, but he got a tattoo of the gym logo at the size of his whole arm. It's a place he's never been to. And he drove across the country to arrive at the gym at 4 a.m. to squat with Coach Lacey. And since he's done everything that's been asked of him of our rite of passage, and he's now an employee at the gym. And together we've started this nonprofit together where we are basically using the developmental principles of this organization to create limitless upside for people who are currently or formerly incarcerated, who often don't have a worldview that includes that possibility. So a couple examples. It's really exciting because some of these guys are getting out now, so Sean just did 4 years and he got out on Monday. These are guys who are able to come and work at the gym with an ankle monitor. They're living in a program put together by the Amity Foundation downtown. And Damar just served 18 and a half years. He's currently enrolled in Cal State Northridge in the psychology school. He's a point of pride for me and us because we have mutual friends. A former teammate of mine was like his best friend growing up. He's from South LA. And Damar is, one of the best natural leaders I've ever met. And it just so happened that in certain circumstances, you can be really good at things that aren't celebrated by our society. And so his story is particularly powerful because he committed a crime at the age of 17, convicted of murder. And because of his age, he has a chance to have another life. And so he would take a train and then a bus and then a long walk. Took like an hour and a half to get to the gym each way. And he is creating a reality for himself that people who spend 18 and a half years in prison don't perceive that they can accomplish. And so, the stories go on, right? Like these are two of many stories inside of this program. And so when you look at leadership, like we have a very specific definition for leadership. I think it's one of the things that gets passed around a lot as a descriptor, but doesn't have a lot of specifics behind it, and it's very difficult to call someone a leader or ask someone to be a leader if you can't define it. And so our definition is like, I don't know if it's the right one, but it really helps us do what we do, which is someone is in leadership when they are responsible for the results. And so with that definition, it removes hierarchy or tenure or whatever it says on your business card, and you can create teams where 100% of the people on the team are in leadership. And that's what I experienced in that hotel room in College Station, Texas as well. And so this worldview allows us to share leadership. I really think that when you take on a perspective like that, leadership, responsibility, love, these are things that can't really be divided, right? And so when you explain that to someone or you create a culture that nurtures that, then you have a situation where Damar, after 18 and a half years in prison, can be held to account of leadership in a culture that's going to ask that of him, and he's going to ask that of us. And I think that's the kind of place that anyone would want to work.
I think that's a beautiful moment to take questions from the audience, and I didn't even have the chance to plug your book. You're too wonderful. But I'll plug his book, Wink. Yeah, let's get some Q&A from the audience, and thank you again. Round of applause for the great and good Logan Gelbrich.
Get the microphone here.
All right.
You got it.
I'm a baseball guy myself, so I have a million questions that I want to ask you. But the first thing I want to ask is, in the beginning, I know a lot of people that are jumping on here want to know about your world record. And although I could talk to you about baseball all day, I just want to hit maybe something that might interest a lot of the masses. That when you were initially talking about your world record, you talked about, you said we figured out that it was, that this was kind of like the math behind something. Did you have a team behind you? Like, what did that look like? Like, you've been talking about teams, and you've been talking about a lot of like what goes into that. Did you have something behind you, like a secret weapon perhaps that most people might not have had, that potentially gave you an advantage?
Yeah, I hate downplaying the record because I know it's like a cool thing, and also it's very humbling to be here, by the way.
You fit in here perfectly because so many people have done amazing things, and they don't really talk about it. Yeah. So we respect that.
Yeah, Andrew said, "Hey, you got to come to this place, and we're gonna talk about some stuff." And I'm like, "Well, you know, you can tell your story." And I'm like, "Well, what's the story?" He's like, "You know, it's like if you ever sat at a bar with like a U.S. president, like what story you tell him?" And I'm like, "I would listen the whole time. I would not say a word." Anyway, tangent. So, no, it was more, I had my best friend Tate Fletcher there. We kind of just did like a quick calculation kind of thing. But the general culmination of the whole thing is I'm the kind of person where I think that I've had these like teachers fall in my lap over and over and over again. And so my story specifically with strongman is I went and took a seminar from a guy who created basically an egalitarian expression of strongman, basically, so everybody could do it. And that's kind of what we teach, you know. I took his seminar, and I just so happened to have the same first name of his son. And then I wrote an article kind of about the thing after. And long story short, for whatever reason, he invited me to teach the seminar thereafter. And so that's by chance, right? And so then I end up teaching the thing. And then Robert Oberst, who's an American log press record holder, world's strongest man competitor, walks into the gym, and then we get to be training partners for a while. And, you know, just kind of like, just being around people that would support this thing is where it all came from. But in terms of the specifics of the day, I can't say that, you know, we sat around with a compass and a, you know, special calculator and figured it out. It's kind of just like a quick thing. But yeah, I really feel that the record is one of those things where, and I think this has happened more times than I can count in the last 5 or 10 years, which is just like the feeling of like, how did I get here? You know, and that was just one of those days, you know.
So we don't have a video of this, right?
Yeah, you were the one in the video. Reebok has it somewhere.
Well, anyways, can you? I mean, I've never seen, or I don't know exactly what this looks like. I mean,
Yeah.
Can you just show us what it is? You stand there and you pick the rock up from the ground, or is it a certain
it would be
level?
like.
How do we not have a giant rock?
That's right.
Or just anything to just kind of demonstrate what it is that you do.
Up into
Yeah. So like it would be like a platform like this. I mean, it was taller, probably like this tall, and the stone obviously doesn't have handles, so you're sort of managing this.
Like stone to pedestal would be a good example.
Yeah.
Why
So.
don't you stand in the middle? There's something. I mean, it's not that heavy, but
Okay.
you know, it's big.
Yeah. So I'm not dressed for the occasion, y'all. Yeah, you have this like big round stone, and there's a basic technique, and the technique is to somehow get the implement to your lap. The lap position is a place for you to become closer to the implement, and there's this kind of like big overhand grip, and if I'm holding this thing close to me, I can pull it in and load it to whatever platform that
So you have to pick it up from the ground.
Yeah.
And the bending over, I mean, my back hurts just thinking about that.
Yeah, it's a very specific, peculiar thing. Yeah, and the like I said, the standards were different than a strongman competition.
Oh, there goes Mike.
We got it. Yeah, once the stone was on the platform, you'd have to demonstrate that you had control, like touching, you know, all these like specific things. But the reason you mentioned the skinny thing, the reason why I did okay in the sport was like a pride in movement. So I didn't want to really compete in strongman or like go down the rabbit hole of it, but I ended up, there's an organization called CrossFit where I was their subject matter expert teaching their seminar on this specific modality. And I just felt like I didn't want to deal with any chatter from the strongman community as, you know, being not a competitor. So I kind of went down the rabbit hole to sort of, you know, see what it was all about. But I was advantaged by a pride in technique. And I think that where the sport of strongman is growing is in a rigor in the technique, right? Sometimes when you're 6'9", 400 pounds, and you know.
I'm right here, dude.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You can get away with stuff, maybe, right? And so, I don't know. As the skinny guy, you can't get away with stuff.
Bob Zeman, 878. We have a member here called Robert Owens, who once was described as the most fit 61-year-old or 60-year-old person in the world. As I told you before, he ran 7 marathons on 7 continents, 7 days, and he also went through some of the military training to be. And he wrote a book, and in his book he mentions DEUCE and CrossFit as 2 of the main civilian training programs that one can go to if they really want to improve their performance there. Have you ever heard of Robert Owens? Or?
Yeah, it sounds familiar. I'm feeling like I'm screwing up right now if I don't know Robert off the top of my head. But
he lives down in Dana Point or
okay.
Down there.
Yeah, maybe he's been through. I appreciate the shout out, though. You know.
So, do you have more than one facility where you have this DEUCE training then, or?
Yeah, we have another gym in Hermosa Beach, and we have a facility downtown in collaboration with Homeboy Industries. So maybe he's stopped by there as well.
Matthew Nader, 1204. Logan, first of all, thank you so much for coming here. This is an absolute pleasure. And like, I can just, as someone who played baseball up until the collegiate level, I definitely a lot of what you said resonates. And my wife has worked very high end in the hospitality industry as a leader as well. And the whole time we're just hitting each other like, why is he not doing a TED Talk right now? For those of you who don't know what a TED Talk is, Google that. But I just want to point out, I love your mentality and where your mindset is. And a lot of your story reminds me of Tim Ferriss, if anybody knows who Tim Ferriss is where he kind of like, he talks about like just kind of just that hard work and that mentality and that mindset kind of led him into backwards ways of getting world records, whether it's flamingo dancing or in different types of martial arts. And I just want to speak to you as you clearly are a leader, but what have you taken from these team sports and these leadership roles that you've clearly had? How did that translate into this individual accomplishment that probably most people know you from, whether you'd like to be known for that or not?
Yeah, I think I can speak to, like, if I'm being honest with the room about why I even became involved at that level with strongman was I think there's a healthy burden that is placed on anyone who identifies as a leader's shoulders, which is that you have to walk the walk, so to speak. And so, the tension I was talking about, like maintaining that tension of requiring a best effort is sort of like it solves for itself, right? And so, I think when you apply a best effort to just about anything, it doesn't mean like world records just like fall out of nowhere. It kind of felt like that happened in this particular instance, but the reason why I sort of went down that rabbit hole was to try to become the person that I thought was important that I become to do a great job. And so, I have no desire to have like individual attention, and it's like really tough for me to be up here, and individual things like really make me nervous. And all that said, if I'm gonna get on an airplane and go to some foreign country and teach a room full of people strongman, I should probably enroll myself in the highest levels of that so that I can speak to it better. And that's about it. I had no desire for like some sort of individual attention about that, you know?
So since you're not afraid of philosophizing a little bit, I want to ask, what's next for those of us who've always been goal-oriented, training to X, and then you get to X, and then you got to pick a new goal, and you stalk it, and you kill it and wrestle it, but eventually, what do old guys do? How do we get off this goal-driven treadmill? Is this making sense? Because how do you transition from being a guy that's living for the next thing to just a guy who's living and not doing a goal?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like doing goals might not be always serving us, right? And so I think the participant, him or herself, would only know the answer as to whether or not they're pursuing goals for some sort of extrinsic motivator that might not be serving. Like if you, in the process of trying to accomplish these goals, which I would imagine is a very common theme here, and sometimes it's healthy and sometimes it's not. But if you're sort of thinking that when you get to the summit, you're gonna like be done or like feel some sort of completion, I think that's maybe a misguided place to start. And I think the P word has gotten a lot of airtime, so it's kind of also lost its power. But we're talking about like process orientation. I feel lucky that I fell in love with the sport of baseball because it is so maddening in terms of its structure and the volume of failure that's sort of built into it, to where the only like solace you have in that sport, especially at the higher levels, is a ridiculous obsession with the process. Almost to the point where, mind you, this is a sport where, and it's changed, so I don't want to be controversial, but someone throws a little white ball 100 miles an hour at you, and if you, in my opinion, do the equivalent of walking on water, which is figure out how to put a certain part of the bat on that ball and hit a ball out of the ballpark. This is a sport that you are actually cooler, this is maybe 10 years ago, if you can put your head down and jog around the bases and not even crack a smile, right? Because the result, it's not about the result, right? If you strike out and you throw your bat and throw a tantrum, you're actually not cool, right? And so I don't know if I'm just projecting my opinion out there, but if you can't love the process, it's never, the high is never gonna hit the way that you want, right? And so, I think that life is this process of a continually moving horizon, never assuming that the horizon is the point, you know?
Yeah, unbelievable evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Years from now, when you're 6 feet under, what do you want your tombstone to say?
Thanks, Larry.
Dark.
Hey, Tarek, he was a leader. Or
Yeah.
he loved process.
I think,
Strikeouts.
yeah, that's right. Don't swing at sliders in the dirt. I don't know. I hope that, yeah, everyone that I come across feels better having met me. You know, I just want to have an impact on people where we all feel like we're better than when we started. Something like that.
So like a little thumbs up emoticon. That's
Yeah.
yeah. You
An
do some nice
emoji.
engraving, emboss it a little bit.
Are we doing emoji tombstones yet?
We are.
Are we?
There'll be an NFT tombstone in the
Okay.
metaverse. Yeah. I'll talk to you after. That's great. Logan, thank you so much. Thank you.
I have one more question. Logan, for everybody who's watching that are adventurers, there's a lot of adventurers out there, but there are a lot of people who are sitting at home who want to adventure or who have lofty goals but just don't know where to start. What would you say to those people? Like, what is taking that first step for some of them?
Yeah, I think that there's a paralysis on anytime you put something on a pedestal and make it far away, it becomes really difficult. I used to cry every time I do public speaking, for example. And one day I stopped crying because I realized every time you do anything that looks like public speaking, you think that you're the president giving, the State of the Union. When in reality, it's just your third grade class and you're reciting a poem, right? So maybe like it's not that big of a deal. So on the adventure question, I think if you put this thing in such a fantastical, faraway place, it feels far away, it doesn't feel possible, and it's not really something you can take action on. So it's the next tolerable step, the next scariest tolerable step, and if you can do that. For example, I've been able to travel around the world, but one of the crazier trips I ever took was just up to Humboldt, and the reason why it was a crazy trip was because I played a game. My mom was a flight attendant for United for 50 years. 50 years, 49 years. And so I got the buddy pass thing, so I called a teammate and I said, pack a backpack, and he said, what do I put in the backpack? And I said, just clothes for one day, no rain. And what he didn't know is we were flying up to Humboldt because that was the closest city that we could fly to and back from by the next time we had some sort of responsibilities. And the game was, you can't call anyone you know, and you can't spend any money, and you got to find a way to get home. And Humboldt is not known for its polar bears or treasure or whatever the case may be, but things get really interesting when you got to find your way through this sort of adventure, you know? And I don't know, I think you'd come home from a free trip like that, spending no money, making a bunch of memories, pretty inspired to like do the next crazier thing. You know?
Logan, thank you again. And everyone, am I borrow someone's camera? We have to. Oh, Presidente has something for you.
Close out the YouTube first.
Oh, YouTube. Thank you. Subscribe, Logan Gelbrich. He had a book that he won't plug, so like a Conan's advisor, like, I cry so Conan doesn't have to. Go read this book, Going Right. It's not a political manifesto, but a life screed. Please, thank you all. Thank you, Logan.
Thank you.